Hey everybody, we're up on the deck of a 1984 Trojan International 10 meter, and this is our next project. What we're going to be doing is coming in and repairing all the gel coat on this upper cockpit area. Now, rather than coming in and respraying all of our gel coat, after we do our repairs, we're going to be going back over with Awlgrip and then applying a non-skid pattern. So let's take a closer look at the areas that we're going to have to address for the repairs, and let's get started. So I've already gone through and removed 2 of the 3 covers up on the back side of this deck here. And as you can see, they were the engine covers. The first thing that we're going to be doing is basically coming in and sanding all of this, the existing non-skid material in the gel coat off. By sanding all this off, it's going to allow us to have a better idea of the cracks and holes and chips and voids, defects in the gel coat that need to be addressed before we paint. Because honestly, once you go through and apply your coat of paint, you can go back and touch it up, but you really don't want to have to do that, because you'll be able to tell, especially on a non-skid area, you'll be able to tell that it was touched up unless you're redoing the entire area. Now I'm going to be sanding all these areas down using 80 grit sandpaper. All of the panels, all of the floor that's up on the boat, I want to get all of the existing, non-skid pattern removed. Now, before I get started on this, I'm going to go ahead and remove any existing hardware that's on here, and luckily on this piece, the only thing I have is this lifting ring. So let's go ahead and get this pulled out, and then we'll let the sanding begin. So now I've hit everything that I was able to hit with the sander, and from here on out it's coming in by hand and just kind of doing the detail work. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at this is, for the most part, people look at sanding as, well, it's sanding. And it's, nothing glamorous, but there are some things to keep in mind while you're doing this that can make the overall job turn out better and actually go a little quicker. One thing that you need to be conscious of when you're sanding is you need to keep the sander flat. And I know it's very tempting to put it up on the edge when you get to a stubborn area, because it seems like it cuts through the surface a little faster, but all you're really doing is you're creating little mini ridges on the surface. And further down the road, when you're sanding your primer, that's going to come back and bite you right in the butt. What'll happen is that when you're sanding your primer, you're just going to end up sanding through the primer on those peaks, and then you're going to have to come back and apply another coat of primer. So keep the sander flat. Level the entire surface out. You're just eliminating that whole issue altogether. Now, just as an example, when you're looking at the floor here, on the areas where I've sanded through and you're actually able to see the bare fiberglass, if I hadn't leveled everything out or kept the sander flat, those would be the areas that I would have sanded through in the primer, and just adding another step to the process. Another thing to keep in mind when you're planning all this is where you're going to be running your brake lines. And by that I mean where you're going to be stopping your painting and having that blend into, the surrounding existing area. As a general rule, you always want to run your brake lines on an edge, whether it be on an edge like this where it's curling over, or looking up more towards the perimeter, like where we're butting up against a bulkhead or a coaming or something like that. You want to run that brake line right at the top of the radius where it curves up. And a really good way to define that edge, when you're dealing with these inside radiuses, is again, keep the sander flat and let the sandpaper kind of naturally scribe the edge or that break line for you. That way it's uniform all the way across, and you're not having to come back by hand and clean it up. It's just you go through, you do it once, you do it right, and you're done. So now looking at things here, I've gone back and kind of circled all of the defects or the areas that I'm going to want to address when we're doing our repairs. Looking here in this corner, there's some stress cracks that are going to have to be dealt with a little bit differently than all the others. Most of the issues on here are holes. For example, there's old chair mounts, there's old snaps that have been removed and just never filled back in. And each repair is unique. So there's depending on what it is you're trying to fix, there's a different way to approach it. For example, some areas are going to need some fiberglass laid up. Other areas are just going to be able to be filled in with some epoxy. And really, some of the other areas just need to have some fairing compound and have the surface brought back into shape. So I think this brings us to a pretty good breaking point, at least for this episode. And we've just to recap a little bit, we've come back, we've sanded everything down, we've circled the areas that we're going to have to address for our repairs in our next episode. And rather than diving right in and having a really long episode, I'm going to break this up a little bit so that it's a little more manageable to watch. And that's the plans, Dan. So in the next episode, we're going to be coming in and looking at each of these different areas that we need to touch up. Some areas are going to be dealt with differently, and we're going to look at each of those areas and what makes them unique, what's the best way to approach them, what's the fastest way to get the repair done and get it done properly. So a couple of quick announcements before we break out here. I've done something. I created a new show, a new channel. And I've decided that the best route for this show is to keep this show strictly about boating. And so I've created another channel that's called From the Wood Shop, which is going to be all of my woodworking projects. So if you came to this site originally for the woodworking, head over to the other channel, From the Wood Shop, and subscribe there. Again, that show is going to be all about the wood. This show is, from this point forward, going to be all about the boat. So if there's any confusion, in the past, especially during the Christmas episodes, that is not going to happen again. And I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you again here very soon. Thanks for watching.